Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight at the Access Pacific User Group. Tonight, we're going to have a presentation on interface design. In the previous few months, we've had a variety of topics on everything from software development lifecycle through SQL Server migration and data validation. So it's time we moved over and focused on the interface, and we have, I think, a really great way to do that tonight with Greg. So Greg, as he introduced himself, he's an Australian certified practicing accountant and programmer in Access, and he's already told you a little bit about his background. So I won't do any more about that. I'll turn the time over to him and ask him to please introduce his topic, and away we go. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, George, and thanks everyone for attending. Yeah, so as George mentioned, I'm an Australian accountant, and I really got into the Microsoft products, Excel and Access, because I was working for a corporate in Melbourne, and I was involved in monthly reporting. And life was a grind. You'd start the reporting, and you get to the end of the month and start all over again, and it was hard work. So I started staying back a few nights and playing with Excel and VBA, and then did some self-training, and I realized I didn't like the reporting. I preferred coming up with easier ways to manage the data. So in one sense, I kind of reinvented myself, and then within the firm, people would come to me when they needed sort of solutions. And then I left that firm, and just by happenstance ended up in Cambodia. And but my experience with Access was actually I needed a solution. I couldn't do it, so I hired a contractor, and he was great. He was an English gentleman who'd migrated to Melbourne, and he was just a great guy, and he did come up with everything I needed for the solution plus more. And the only thing about it is that the actual interface didn't look great. I didn't care because it worked. But then, for whatever reason, I took a year's leave, and I told some management of the firm, there's lots of things we could do with this guy. And then I went away. When I come back, I sort of followed up and said, "Hey, did you get Mike to look into ways that we can improve our processes?" And they just dismissed it out of hand because his solutions didn't look great. And it was kind of sad because he could do the job, but unfortunately, even though we say we don't judge a book by its cover, we do, and even book companies put a lot of money into covers, by the way. So, and one thing that Georgia and I were talking about is when you're trying to get board approval for a solution. So you might be talking with, say, an employee within the firm, and they're taking it up to management. They often don't have time to really go into the solution itself. So, your sale may be made or broken by the presentation, by the look, and also word of mouth is another thing. So, I just want to say though that I'm not a professional designer. So you just read through the caveat here. These are just my opinions, thoughts, and ideas, and there's probably some of you out there have got some even better ideas or some different ideas. And, I'm just a guy. But what I did notice that when I put some effort into to make the interface not look like Access, I got a lot of feedback. And that was even from some technical colleagues in Cambodia. They were asking what the application was built on. And these are guys that worked in Access and Excel, that they didn't know it was Access. And that's kind of where I'm trying to get to, whereas people don't know what it's built on, that they're not worried about what's in the box. They're just looking at the solution itself. So as I say, adopt these ideas at your own peril. And why it's important. So it's a great solution where Microsoft Access is a great solution where there's not an off-the-shelf solution. That is real value. You could say the same about Excel, but Access is a lot more robust if you've got a more intricate or serious problem to solve. But Excel is actually easier to sell because people use it every day. They're familiar with it. And I've heard a lot of derogatory comments about Access, which I think is not fair. And I think it's often based on the look. So what I'm saying, I first started attending these meetings about 2016, 2017, and I said that there's a community out there, and my work affects your work and vice versa. So if we can all put out better solutions, then we're going to give Access a better name. So I'm just, think as a community, let's see how we can, make Access more saleable. And so, as I said, clients judge the book by its cover, and even though you might get one sale, you're more likely to get another sale if you've got a better looking solution. And I think it was Chris who mentioned that he looks at modern web design when he's thinking about his presentation of his interfaces. And that's what we're up against now. Great design is out there, and you can set up a website and use add-ins, and it's quite difficult to make a bad design. So great designs everywhere, and that's raised our clients' expectation of what they'd like to see. So as a community, we owe it to each other to boost the image of Access. Yeah, so clients have more confidence in a product that looks good. If you have a portfolio of good-looking solutions, it's easier to sell. And again, we're up against modern web design. Garage built is a term that I've heard come up again and again, and they're only judging by the look. It's not a great technical solution, can still be criticized as garage built, even though it does the job. So together, let's bolster the image of Access as a serious solution to client needs. So one question we could ask ourselves is, would I be happy if I were paying somebody else for the solution, just based solely on the look and feel, not the actual technical solution, but would I be happy if I purchased this solution off a contractor? Another thought to keep in mind is work backwards. So, I see a lot of technical people jump into the, code and, forms and things. What we really should do is just do a design sketch and work backwards from there. And that can just be a sketch on a piece of paper, sitting down with the client, seeing what they need, sketching it out on paper, and then sort of starting backwards from there. So an overview of what we're going to cover. So one thing is contrast, and George and I were having a little chat about this because George mentioned the topic of accessibility, and I might get George to sort of chip in and say something about that in a minute. But one thing that we would like in our interface is contrast. So we'll be having a look at that. And then you get into the issue of icon versus text-based. And it's not always one solution fits all, which we'll talk about. And again, icon versus text-based. And then some other things, there's some customization, checkboxes, we'll look at that. Date pickers, I often don't like a lot of the date pickers that are out there. So let's have a look at that, make it easy for our client. Pop-ups, pop-up windows and how we might treat those. A Wiki date picker, we'll look at what that's talking about, but it's using a combo box. And modal forms, so what we'll be covering there is kind of just a pop-up idea there. We'll be looking at that. And record selectors, alternatives, and resizing our forms to the screen, and maybe one approach in regard to that. Combo boxes and anchoring so that when forms resize, icons are placed where they should be. So accessibility wasn't a term that I really considered in terms of design. And George kindly gave me some of his time as a sort of pre-run to this presentation about a week ago, and mentioned that. So, George, would you like to sort of just say something about the importance of accessibility and your experience with the latest Northwind release?
Oh, yes, as a matter of fact, this came about late in the process of building Northwind, and it turned out that Microsoft has an accessibility standard, and all of their applications have to pass this review. And it has to do with a lot of the things that Greg's going to show you: fonts, colors, the contrast. It's related to the ability of not hearing impaired, but sight impaired people, and the use of screen readers to make it possible to work with an interface without necessarily having full use of your abilities. And one of the interesting things about that is that they have go, no go, publish, no publish authority over new applications. We were not able to release Northwind until we had satisfied their priority one accessibility issue. That was something that we simply hadn't anticipated. It turned out to be for the better, because I think it was a much better product, but it was quite an eye-opener that degree of importance was attached to it.
Right. Yeah. So that wasn't a term I was actually aware of in terms of interface design. So it's interesting that Microsoft's made that important. But I think we'll check some of those boxes as we go through this. So one thing is we could look at in design idea is colors. And one consideration is client branding. So I have my ideas about sort of colors and that, which we'll look at. But one consideration that you might consider is client branding. So just a little story is that I did a solution. It wasn't Access, it was actually Power BI, and I was hired by a group of developers, and I gave the solution back to them, and they said, "Oh, this is fantastic! Fantastic! The client will love it." And we went back to the client. They said, "Oh, we didn't tell you, but you have to incorporate our branding into the color scheme." So the question on that is obviously who pays. Now they were willing to, pay us a bit more to make the adjustment. And when I was preparing this, I was thinking, look, check this first before proceeding with any other color considerations to avoid, those prickly discussions. But I'm having a rethink about it now. So the thing is about some client colors may not be fantastic for an interface. Okay. So maybe one way to approach it is to maybe come up with a mock-up and see if they agree, and make that part of the terms and conditions, part of the scope, and let them come back and say if the client colors should be part of this design. And if they do, then you might have to explain why that might not be optimal for them. But it's just one consideration that caused a hiccup in one of the projects that I worked on. So we'll come to the issue of color palettes. So which colors work together? And again, I said that, I'm not a designer. So what do? Well, I do a search and see what's out there. So one thing I do is I search online for color palettes. And for example, you might search for blue-orange color palettes. So here I'm doing a Bing search for blue color palettes, and a lot of images come up. And you can often click onto these, and it'll often take you to a site that shows you some a range of palettes you could choose from. Here I'm doing blue-orange color palettes. And so often these websites will give you the hex color codes that we can copy and put into our the properties of our controls and forms. What we're looking for is contrast. So font versus background. Sorry. And contrast becomes more important for smaller font. So you'll notice in the banner that I've got across the middle of the screen, the larger text can be a little bit darker. And as we go smaller, I'm getting a little bit lighter, and then still a bit lighter as the font goes smaller. Still trying to stay within a certain sort of color scheme. So in terms of color palette websites, there's one I like, which is called coolers.co. So here's a snapshot of their homepage. You'll see a start the generator blue button there on towards the left. But you can have a play in there. I haven't joined up as a member. I just go and have a look in there for ideas. So here's one search I did within Coolers, and it came up with a range of palettes that might work together. And as I said, you can click on one of the colors there, and it's going to give you the hex code that we can use. So, and the other thing I often do is Bing or do a search for Power BI design templates. So, and it comes up with a range of images. So so the color palette, the thing I like about Power BI is that I think Microsoft have done a good job of color choices. It seems harder to make a bad design or in a Power BI application. It really works quite well out of the box in terms of the colors. So here I've just picked some images at random. I'll put them up. Yeah, I just click through these. Now, the thing about the images I've just shown is when I'm looking at these, I'm not looking at the interface, but what I'm just looking is how the colors work together. So you'll see that the darker orange is quite big, and then we've got some text, and that's a lighter color because it's small. And so I'm really just seeing how the colors work. I'm not looking for design in terms of the placement of graphs and text, etc. So addressing the topic of contrast, what I'm looking for is readability and also visual comfort. So visual comfort, what I'm talking about, we look at a screen all day, so I don't want it to be too aggressive when I'm looking at it, especially when I'm spending a long time in front of the application. So here I've come up with a color palette, and I prefer my forms to have a dark background, and then to have lighter colors for font and maybe controls. So in this color palette, let's assume that we use the darker color at the bottom for the background. And then these colors at the top, the complementary colors, could be used for fonts, say. And one thing to keep in mind is that the darker color is still going to work well on larger font, say headings. And then the medium color here, which we have this, the second color from the top, might be suitable for slightly smaller text, might be a subheading. And then more detailed font, which might be smaller, might need a lighter font. If I were going to a very small font, then I'd probably just use white. But you see, we're still within the color scheme. We haven't deviated from the color scheme. And the other thing about changing the font shade or color according to the size of the font is it can help us sort of compartmentalize a form where there's quite a bit of text on there. Talk about compartmentalization. It's not a designer term, it's a Greg term. So again, choice of fonts is another consideration for our interface. So normally for interfaces, I avoid serif fonts. And I was mispronouncing this a week ago until George corrected me. So thanks, George. So what are serifs? So serifs are the little, I'm calling little curly bits at the end of the strokes. So you'll see there, this is a sans serif font, and this is a serif font. So you'll often find this in books, and I like it for reading. So here's your serif here. So in my opinion, for interfaces, the serif reduces clarity and looks kind of old. I love it for reading. It feels kind of homely and warm, but not for interfaces. So here I've just picked out a range of fonts that I might typically consider that are sans serif or without serif. And the fonts that I've put here, I've actually typed them in using the actual font. So the Calibri font, the Calibri you see on screen is using Calibri font, Arial's using Arial font, etc. So these are some of the fonts I like. But whenever you're choosing your font, also look at numbers. So the Kandara at the bottom seemed okay. I just don't like the way it looks at the numbers there. You look at the 9s and the 6s. So that would be out for me. So I'm crossing that off. And also consider font size. So you might say that I'm using, say, a Calibri font. As you go to some smaller controls, you might use a similar font just because of its kerning. So kerning is more about the way that the font stretches out horizontally, or the spacing between the letters. So you might consider different font for say, smaller controls based on the space limitations. Just a matter of having a play with that. And when you go smaller, no one's going to realize that, say, the font difference if you're using a sans serif font. So it's all about function rather than sticking to a given rule. In the end, you've got to make it work. Any thoughts, questions, feedback, anything you'd like to contribute so far? Anything you'd like to contest?
If you'd like to unmute and ask a question, this will be a good place to do that.
Okay, so we move ahead. So softness is one sort of concept that I've come up with. Others may have as well, but so we look at a lot of time looking at bright screens. So for me, I prefer the solution that I'm looking at, or the application I'm looking at, to be easy on the eye as possible. So one way we can have some softness is to use dark themes, so dark background and light fonts, and it's good for contrast and readability. And here I have a monochrome version down the bottom, and it's not actually black and white, it's dark gray on off-white, so which I find a bit softer than, say, black on white. So here I have that monochrome version that I talked about, and then we have the comparison of the completely black and white version. So I find this, say, softer, easier on the eye. And we've still got good contrast. Okay, we've still got good contrast. We're not compromising contrast at all. But if the font was smaller, then we might just go to a pure white font for smaller font, for smaller text. And here's just a comparison. If you see something written that on the left side we've got pure black and white, and on the right side we're using a dark gray font, and it's perfectly legible. So contrast is something we'll have a look at now. So this is just a screenshot from a law firm management software that I've been developing. And here I'm using a dark background, and then we call this the neon design, where we're using some brighter colors for the icons, but we've got plenty of contrast there. And the background that I'm using, it's you could call it a charcoal. It's not pure black. The other thing to note is that the form is bordered by a sort of like a thin fiery orange border for delineation against other applications that it may sit on top of. So the dark theme's easier on the eye, and the background's a dark gray, which sort of meets my idea of the softness I'm looking for. So softness, I'm trying to avoid harshness, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So we come to the topic of icon versus text-based. Okay, so I prefer icons to text interface, but it's not always one size fits all. So here we've got an icon-based window or form. And one challenge with icons is that when you're trying to represent a concept with an icon, it's not always obvious. So how do we deal with that? And we'll look at that a bit later. So here's another form in the same application. So if you look up here in orange at top, the orange tab at top left, we're on the timekeepers tab. So this is where the lawyers would spend most of the time in this window. And now we're in settings global, and we've got a text-based format, which is not very pretty. But the point about this is that it's rarely used, and it's only used by the tech user, which is me or my son, or who's working as an intern in this particular client, or a couple of other people there. It's rarely used. So I'm not going to spend the time developing that and like spending any more time on it. And in any case, I would find it hard to come up with an icon for some of these. So it's about form and function. It's just not necessary for something like this to spend the time putting icons on it. And so when we talk about icons, so what do the icons represent? So let's consider the classic save icon that we have, and it's a diskette. Okay, so there are a lot of people born in the last 20 years who wouldn't have never seen a diskette, but they know that the diskette icon means save. So icons are often about familiarity. Once you use the program a few times, you get to know what the icons mean. But how can we make it easier for the user to be familiar with what the icons mean? So one concept I have here is a custom tooltip, which you see on screen. So the user will be hovering above this icon with an arrow pointing to the telephone. And as they do that, the tooltip will momentarily pop up telling you what that icon is about. So it's pending phone inquiries that haven't been answered. So it's best of both. So it gives you the best of both worlds. So it's icons and text, but only when you need it. So when you hover on the icon, you'll see what it's about. And the other thing is it's a custom tooltip idea, because the built-in tooltips that we have are very slow and laggy. So I'll just play this here. So as you hover above the icons, you get a little description of what they mean. And here I have an icon reader. So if you want a tour of the screen, you can click through the text. It's like a table of contents to the screen, if you like. So in terms of icons, so how do you get your icons? How do you come up with your icons? So there's a free software called Metro Studio. It has a massive array of icons within it, and you can search them by theme. You can search them by name as well. Clean, modern, flat design. And you can create projects. So if you're working on different client projects, you can create a project within the software and collect your icons within that. And it's customizable. You can change the background, the size, and the colors, and the price is the best price around, which is free. So it's free to use legally. And there on screen, you have the links where you can go and get that. And there's an overview video there, but it's easy to use, and we're going to have a look at that now. So when you open up the software and you're looking for icons, you'll see that there's an icon category on the left: application, banking, brand identity. Currently, as you can see in red, we're clicked on the application tab, and in the middle, there's all the icons that may relate to applications. So that's going to be an obvious area that we'd look for icons for our applications. Here, there's a data category, gadgets. So yeah, there's all kinds of categories there that you can choose from. So one application I was working on had a heat map, or what the client called a heat map. So what's an appropriate icon? So I thought a chili might be good. So I searched for the word chili, and voila, we have some chili icons come up. And what I can do is actually just drag that into a down to the square at the bottom left, and that will create a new project. Or I could drag it onto one of these existing projects we have at the bottom. And what color would I want for that? So I'm doing my search, web search for chili red color palette, and I might choose one of those colors. So I ended up here on this site here, and I chose that color for my chili icon. So here I'm choosing the chili icon, dragging it down to a new project, and then I'm naming the project, clicking, and then I'm hitting the edit pencil. That's going to open it up. So in my project, I just have one icon at the moment. So you can remove the background, which is probably what we want. We want a transparent background. I normally use a large pixel size for resolution, remove the padding, and save it. If you export it, by default, it exports to a PNG, which is what we want for transparent backgrounds, but you could choose a JPEG as well. So there, we've saved it, and it exports it out to your folder. And that's what it would look like. And what I've done, I've pasted my color code from my web search into this box here for the icon color. Typically, they'll start off as white when you drag them into your project. Interesting though, if you keep the same color for all your icons, what I found is the next icon that I drag into that project will be the same color as the previous one. It's only when you start to change colors that you've got to paste your color into this background here. You can rotate your icons around with the software, flip them which way. So it's amazingly fully featured for coming up with icons without being a graphic designer. You can put a background on it as well, which might be appropriate for your particular application. Change the background color there. Just have a border on the background with no fill. Change the color there of your background. So it's really quite an amazing tool for free. So here I'm doing search for a flame icon, dragging it into my existing project. You notice that the color of the flame icon is the same as the previous icon already. So what I do is I use a large pixel size, even though the icon's going to be small in the interface. It doesn't make for a large PNG file. So I'm using 256 pixels, and I use zero padding, typically for mine, because I haven't got a background on my icons. And by the way, just here, I also, by default, you'll have a background on it, and I click this icon here, and that removes the background, so that I've got a transparent background. So this software only found when I attended one of Juan Soto's AUG talks. The topic of the talk was not about design or anything, but just get these sort of random little tips by attending these talks. So thanks very much. And my other people that I'd like to thank in my Access journey, the people you see on screen. So yeah, they put a lot of materials out there and helped me a lot. There are others that I haven't mentioned, but yeah, I'm very grateful for someone who's still learning and probably still a long way behind a lot of the people who are attending this call. It's been really helpful. So customization, maybe again, just take a break and see if there's any feedback. Any ideas, any thoughts that you might have? Okay. I'll move on. I'm really interested to hear from Chris too, because he said he has a focus on that. So maybe at the end we'll have a little chat. But yeah, I'm really keen to hear from others who've already have interface as a goal. So some customization, and the customization, it's about getting Access to look less like Access. And one of the things that I don't really love in Access are the look of the checkboxes. So for me, they look very 90s. So here, just have a little video. And if you look, before we play the video, if you look at the bottom, I've got limit access to the above team. So this is a team that's working on a client job. And I've got this, the checkbox that we're looking at here is at the bottom, okay? And you can see that that's not a out-of-the-box access checkbox. So when I click it, it has a pop-up to confirm the value change. And when I float above it, it can also have a little explanation of what it's meant to do. But the point is that I've customized this to my interface design. So the pop-up form allows user to confirm the change. So the issues I have with the standard built-in Access checkbox is that it's not very customizable at all. So yeah, you can customize the accompanying label, but I haven't found a way to customize the control itself. So here we have the standard checkbox, and here we have the solution that I'm using. And we can resize it, and we can make it whatever color we want. So in the way do it is that here's the way it would look. And what I've done, I've just copied it all below and then pulled it apart. So what would happen is that the label is going to sit over the top of the two images, which is on and off, or a yes, no. It's two separate images, and they were actually lined up to sit on top of each other. And the change in value, or the code, is triggered when we click on the label, which is sitting on top of everything else. So it looks like, you know, all one piece, but it's kind of three parts. So in terms of the code, what I do is in the tag value of these images, I'm putting in the field that is being affected, and then the value on or off. And I'm putting those in, let's see, they're braces, curly brackets, braces, so that the code can pull that text apart. And so just on the code here, when we click that label, we're going to toggle the checkbox values, and we put in the actual value of the field that we want to change, and some other properties. So here we have that function, or the sub here. So we're just toggling the checkbox images, and that it's going to go off to another function, which is toggle checkbox images. So it's after the user has confirmed that they want to change the value, all we're doing is changing the underlying field to what it's not. So, you know, the control value is equal to the opposite of what it is currently. And then it'll go through to toggle the actual images. So here's the toggle checkbox images. This is where we make one of the checkboxes visible and the other one invisible. So I won't dwell on that too much, because you can go back and look at the video. But what it's doing, it's looking for what it does. It loops through the controls on the form and make sure that they're the right type. So if the type of image is an access image, and then it has this has the value within the tag, then we've got the right control. And from there, we work on its visibility, depending if it's on or off. So again, we've got the on or off. And the reason we put the on or off in curly brackets is to delineate it from the actual field itself. Any thoughts, feedback, questions, suggestions?
Yeah, I use a character, a text box with a character, and use I can't remember what the codes are now, but something like ASCII 137 or 138, whatever. And you can get a cross or a tick. You can get a smiley face. If you use the webdings, or I think it's webdings or wingdings, and works the same way. You can change the color as well. So you might have a
exactly.
Red. Yeah. Anyway, thought I'd just say that.
No, that's good, because with the font, then you can obviously change colors and size, like you said. So it's another way to go about it. Yeah. And I guess you could just use you're just changing the font value, right? You don't need to actually have a separate control for that. So that's the other nice way of doing it.
Yeah, the only issue you have to have a control you can send the focus to. I don't want to get involved, talk this through too much, but a control you can set the focus to. Otherwise, what can happen is the user can effectively see the underlying value of 0 or 1 or -1.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So actually, that's interesting, because what I do, I have that issue in other areas as well, where you need a control that has the focus. So what I often have is a control which is a text box that width is set to 0, and it doesn't have a tab, can't tab to it, and it's hidden, say, hard against the hard left of the form, and that's what I call my focus catcher control. So I'll move it to there before I do something.
Yeah, I did the same, but with a width height. I set all those values to 0.
Yeah, exactly. And then and I change make sure the background's transparent, blah blah blah. But once you've set your width and height to 0, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, with a command button, you can set the transparent to true, and I find that works better than trying to use a text box for setting the focus.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. Excellent.
Okay. Anyway, I'll go back on mute.
Thanks.
And Marlett font's actually very good. I use that in preference to Windings for doing text emulations of checkboxes.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. I'll have a look at that. Yeah, because I like the font approach because, for example, my on-off checkbox images are actually images, and I have to then, change the color of those, the color set, like once I put onto the form. Whereas there's more sort of flexibility with a font approach. So that's good. The Marlett font, I'll look that up. So tooltips, we've got tooltips been built into controls which pop up to show some instructive text. They're often laggy and they're often not obvious. So I've got a little video here. So I've got a pop-up window, and I'm swiping across the tortoise icon, and nothing happens. I've got to hold it there before the tip comes up. So the custom solutions is completely responsive. So here we looked earlier in the introduction. So as I float my mouse above the icons, the tooltip pops up immediately, and I've got the best of both worlds because you can scroll through the text version of all of the icons there. So the anatomy of all of that. So here we have the form in design mode, and the custom tool tip is at the bottom, which is composed of several pieces. So here we have just a background label, we have the text label, and we have the caps at the end, the left and right, which are just images. And what the code is going to do is feed through the text through the tooltip, which sits on top of the background, and it's going to auto expand according to the text that's provided to it, and then put it all back together. And the other thing that the code's going to do is you float above a particular icon, it's going to move to the like the left of this will move to the right of that icon. So these pieces of the tooltip must be set to center front. So when you select them, you have this property here in arrange, and you click bring to front there. And you do the same for this text label, but you've got to do that last so that it sits on top of the other pieces of these pieces here. So the label must be on top of the image components. And what the text that's going to pop up is found here. The 0, 1 is more about ordering. Probably don't want to go into that too much, but that was more about the icon reader. We go back here, play this video, maybe I can zoom it along. Yeah, so this here, the order is determined, like the order the text appears here in the list is determined by that number there. But the solution's more about this text here that's going to be fed into the code. So as we move our mouse above an icon, we call this function, the my tooltip shared. It's putting in the name of the control and the form. And then what we're doing is we're ensuring that the control is an image or a label. Now, obviously you're controlling the code, but it's just, I just put that in so that when I'm developing, you know, I don't make any mistakes. And it uses a timer because what we want to do is show the tooltip, but it should disappear within a couple of seconds. So we want to ensure that the last timer is cleared. That should say ensure last timer is cleared. And then what we want to do is auto size the label width according to the provided text. So it's got to stretch out horizontally. So, and we've got some padding there with 100. And what we do is we take the length of the tag value and then multiply it by 165. Now, if you were doing something like this, you might have to play with that because it would depend on the font that you're using. You just have to play around with it and see how it works. And then what we're doing is joining the parts of the tooltip so that they're all joined together. And we're removing the number prefix from the tag value. Sorry, so we're extracting out that one, which was just for order purposes. And we're moving the custom tooltip to the particular icon that we've hovered over. And we're connecting up the various parts. And then we're also showing or hiding them according to the timer. So then what we do is we start a new process, which is hide my tooltip. So we immediately show the custom tooltip, and then after a second or so, it should disappear. So, and we record the name of the current timer process so that we can erase it later on. So it's going into this timer solution, actually using a Windows timer. We'll be here for quite a while. So, but just understand what it's doing is it's starting off a timer that's when it finishes after a second or so, it's going to run the code that hides the tooltip that we're showing. It's unfortunate that if you go back to VB6, you used to be able to place an unlimited number of special icons on a form, and in Access, we've only got one sort of timer property, which is a shame. And you can make the timer do multiple things, but I kind of found it problematic. So the code's using a Windows timer. Any thoughts, feedback, questions?
I have just one. How did you come to the period of time you show it? Like 1 second, 2 seconds? What's the?
I was just playing with it and looking at what seemed reasonable. So what would happen is, it's a good question because it raises some other things about it. Obviously, if you're floating above one of these icons, the tooltip's going to pop up, right? Okay, maybe I've got an image here, but so yeah, as we look here, regardless of the time that we set for it to disappear, as soon as you float above another icon, it closes out that timer of the previous one and immediately hides the tooltip on the previous that was previously being shown. So that's one thing. But in terms of how long it would stay up, I just chose, I think it's a second or something like that, which doesn't seem long, but it's sufficient. It was just a matter of kind of suck it and see, and I come up with that. But you can, within the code, you can change it. If we go back to the anatomy here, yeah. So here we've got the like the period of time that we'd leave it open. So it's a second.
It's always a question about how. Well, the word that comes to mind is intrusive. That's not really what I want to say, but how much you interrupt the flow of the user, and what's appropriate.
Yeah, you're exactly spot on. I think intrusive is exactly the word that we need. So if it stays up too long, it becomes annoying, and it took me quite a while to kind of get it right for what I felt was right. But yeah, intrusive is exactly the word. It can become annoying.
Yeah, I use about a second for displaying things for a short period of time. I tend to display them for about a second. But for other things, I look at typing speeds, and typically I'll use about a quarter or a quarter to a half a second. If people are typing and you want to interrupt the typing, for example, on a Find As You Type, then I usually put a timer in of about a third of a second. But if you're moving a mouse, you're kind of walking around, it's going around a bit slower, so you can afford to go a bit longer.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. I went away from that because my code wasn't very good. So what I have is people start to type in a text box where they're doing a search. It might filter a list based on their search. I have a little label that pops up and says press tab, press enter, because my timing, it didn't work out very well. So yeah, your code's probably better than mine.
Well, the theory on typing is that if people are typing, they might type one character, 2 or 3 characters, and I then give it a quarter to half a second after they've stopped typing before it displays the results. If they keep on typing, no,
exactly.
Anyway,
okay, thanks. So this is about a custom date picker, so making it easy for the client to pick dates, individual dates or a date range. I found that a lot of applications don't have really user-friendly date pickers, so just trying to think of a way to make it easier for the client. So what we have is text fields where the dates would be entered, but we don't type them in. And there's going to be a date picker icon that will show when the either of these text fields is selected. So here we've got the cursor in the from date, and then the date picker icon appears. And then when it appears, it's going to show today's date. So it's going to show a range from to based on just the current date. And then what we have in the from side is year and month, the to side, year and month. And so clicking the years selects a year on the from calendar and the to calendar. So double clicking will select on the from side, will select the whole month for the given year. Double clicking the year selects the whole date range. Just a little video demonstration. So it's defaulting to today's date range. So we click the year, it changes the year on the from calendar. Click the month, it goes to the first of the month. We double click, gives us the whole year. We get yesterday, and we get the previous day. And the other thing I didn't show there, if you were to click the, double click the, we go back, if you were to double click the month on the to side, it would go to the end of that month. So it makes it quite easy. Got a lot of good feedback on that from the client because the application requires a lot of selection of dates, engagement date, inquiry date, expected finish date, etc., etc. So they're using the dates a lot. So yeah, they tended to give good feedback on solution. One caveat is it does require the installation of this OCX, and there are the instructions as to how to do it. It's pretty easy. Because the actual controls here, that's using an OCX calendar control there, or an ActiveX calendar control. So this is the way the solution is sort of broken down. So we have list boxes for the years and the months. And we have number one, so we have the ActiveX calendar controls, and you can go into its properties and change its colors. We have the list boxes, and they're populated with a on the fly with a range of years and months far beyond what's ever going to be used. And the labels, 3, they're going to show in text format the selected dates from and to. And we have obviously the command button to confirm the selection. And we have the command button at the top, the yesterday and previous weekday. So there, which will populate this. So yeah, so the values of these are set when the form opens. Now, if a particular form is using the custom date picker and the fields already has a date in it, then that will be passed. It won't default to today. When we make a date selection, that's going to be held in temp bars. So if we change the date, then it's going to, so we go back here. So if there was already a date sitting in one of those fields and you open it up, it'll obviously, it'll default to the existing date range that was previously selected. And so, yeah, so as the date picker form opens up, we're just doing some placement here. And one thing we want to do constantly is make sure that the to date is either equal to or greater than the from date, and vice versa. And we're placing the selected values into temp bars. And yeah, so the default values, if yeah, based on today's date in the absence of a previous value. So when we click, it just changes the year for this date. But if we double click, it selects the 1st of January to the 31st of December for that selected year. If we double click the month, it will select the 1st to the end of the month for the given, for the selected month and selected year. And as we click the year, it'll just change the year on the to date. And after you update the month, it'll just change the month on this side. But if we double click the month, it will go to the end of that month. And you can still manually select dates on the ActiveX calendar control, but using the list box will change the values in those. So the properties that are interesting are the max date and the min date, and the value property as we change the dates there. So as we select values in either of those, we need to make sure that the date range is a positive one, that the to date is greater to or equal than the from date. So we're working with those properties there. And so the month view 2 is the actual control. That's the name of the calendar control. And yeah, and we're putting the selected values into a temp var. So that's where you kind of manually select the dates using a calendar picker. Often though, you don't need a date picker. And so what I'm talking about here is a lot of reports run for standard date ranges. So for example, here, what this form is showing is matters. So in the legal term, matters just means jobs. So we have clients in this column here and their jobs, which are called matters here. And therefore it's showing based on a date range based on the date that the jobs were opened. And we want to filter this form based on date ranges, but typically you're looking at standard date ranges that you can use. So we look at, say, the previous weekday, last 7 days, last 14 days, etc. Maybe the month to date, last 3 months, last year, year to date, etc. So our wiki date just has those values hard coded into them, and then we select it. It's going to populate the from to dates accordingly, and according to what we select here, these values will be populated. If we were to click on either of these text fields, the date picker icon would appear, and we could manually select the range. So it's just a standard list of common reporting date ranges. And these ones allow us for non-standard date ranges. We use our custom date picker. So that's just one idea. When we select that, it's going to work out what, based on today's date, what those date ranges are and populate this accordingly. So any feedback or thoughts on that? So we've got a question or a comment from Dwayne. Have you considered physical dates rather than calendar? Your reports dates are basically, yeah, okay, I get what you mean. So yeah, I guess, so for example, in Australia, our fiscal date range is not the calendar date range. There's a 6-month offset.
Yeah, well, when we worked in manufacturing and your week, always started on a Monday, and a month either had 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And so, it didn't really follow like January, February, March. It was, either a 4-week or 5-week period, always starting on the Monday and ending on a Sunday. So I could see where, the previous screen for selecting for reporting, and that's when we used it the most. When we needed to report out, the previous fiscal quarter or the previous fiscal month, you could easily incorporate that. And that typically meant keeping a calendar of dates that you'd look up those values. So you might even allow both by having maybe a checkbox or something that's allowing you to switch from calendar like Gregorian to fiscal or something like that. But yeah, I could see where that could be implemented pretty easily within this screen here.
Yeah, and what I'd probably do for something like that is I would have some sort of technical settings where I would let the client choose their calendar year. So for example, this solution's been developed in Cambodia, and we'd like to take it out to law firms somehow around the world. The US, Canada would be the first market that we think of. And so this is probably going to be fine for that. But if I wanted to take it to Australia, New Zealand, etc., then we would have to adapt that. And then what I would have is in sort of global settings for the whole client, choose your fiscal year and then make the code work accordingly. And yeah, this could be adapted to put in weeks, but it just wasn't necessary for this particular application. But yeah, you could definitely, you could adapt it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good examples of a calendar table, and they're specific, very helpful, like with joining with, within SQL, within queries and such, so that you can easily categorize or group by, fiscal week, fiscal month, those kinds of things. So, the calendar table within an application like this can have a lot of benefit and allow the the user to kind of customize some of that.
Yeah, and I had to go down the road with it. It was actually an Excel application, but what it was is that our Excel application stuck its fingers into a SQL Server backend of a third-party software, and the dates were expressed in big int, and so I needed a calendar table to convert those, like to map back those big int to normal dates and work with it. And but then you can put other columns that are useful, like day of the week, first day of the year, blah blah blah. You had a range of columns. Yeah, so that's a really good way to do it, is have a calendar table within your backend.
Okay. Can I interrupt? I have to be the bad guy here. We're an hour and a quarter, so it's up to you. If you want to, I think I'm seeing what you've got behind here, and I want to see that part. So I would like to see see what you have left, but I want to respect your time too, because
I'm perfectly good. It's for everyone else. Sorry, I'm probably not managing the time as well as I.
No, this is it always works this way. We find interesting things to talk about. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That
from my point of view, it's now 4:45 in the morning, so I'm starting to nod off. Is there much more to go? I'm not trying to rush you, but
there's probably let's see where we are. There's probably about 15-20 more minutes, I would say.
I think I'm gonna hang it out for that long. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Good. Yeah. That gives us an idea. I think that's fine. I just didn't want to, go without, because I am really excited about the highlighting, and so I definitely want to see that. And I will shut up and let you go on.
Okay. I'll try and move it along. Okay. So some form ideas. We've got pop-ups. So how do we handle those? So Windows, you might know Windows has got a dark theme. You can switch over to dark theme where all the backgrounds are black and the text are light. What I find is when the windows are stacked on top of each other, I find it hard to delineate where the form is. So one idea is that here we have an example pop-up form. The first idea is that we highlight the border on the pop-up, so that it's delineated with forms in the background. We can see it. This border will auto adjust when the form is opened to the size of the form. So auto sizing for the, so on the design, that's the border. It's actually just a rectangle, and it's going to auto size. So as I have different forms and different sizes, I don't have to try and manually size it. And if I adjust the size of my form in development, then the border is going to adjust itself accordingly. So has a tag border box there, and it's going to get triggered when the form opens. So it's show form border and function, and I'll leave that on the screen. People can go back and have a look at it, but the concept is fairly simple. It's just going to auto size. Note that the property that you use is the form inside height. Okay, so that might be a catcher for anyone who's trying something like this. On the form, I'm using a custom close button. I don't love the red cross close button that Access gives us, so I just use a custom close button. And the other thing that we talked about compartmentalizing. So here we have some text, and we've got the header that's a darker color, visible. The slightly smaller text is a slightly lighter color. And so compartmentalizing with color and shade. So how we do that is we have the default color on these labels are all the same. We start off with the same color that we've chosen from our color palette. And what I want to do is make these two lighter. So I select the forecolor, and then all we have to do is open that up and go to the custom here and just use the slider. So we're staying within the same color theme, but we're just making it a bit lighter without having to look at hex values or anything like that. And I'm just doing it by eye. I'm not, I'm not trying to get to a specific color. It looks all right. I'll go on with it. Another concept is the fade in and out on open and close. So I'm trying to add a bit of zen or softness to it. So form fade in and out. We'll have an example here. So as the form opens up, it sort of softly fades into view and fades out of view. To give a bit of softness or takes away some of the abruptness or harshness in user experience. I think not everyone's going to love that, but that's my clients seem to like it. And it works on form opacity. So again, we can kind of brush through this because you can kind of go back and look at it, but it works about cycling through the opacity of a form from 1 to 255 on a timer, or it's just a loop really. So all that you could pause on the video to look at the code there. So record selectors. I don't like the built-in record selectors that we have. So here we have an image, and on the left we have the record selector turned on for the form, and we have this row here highlighted, which is denoted by sort of the dark spot there. It's not overly obvious, and I just don't think it looks nice. It also takes up column width. So on this, on this form I needed a lot of columns, the information according to the client requirement. So width is at a premium, so that's not very helpful. So what's the alternative? And it's conditional formatting, one alternative. And so here we have the highlighted row here. It's obvious how we've got a bit more width, usable width, because we don't have the record selectors engaged. So it's attractive, it matches the color scheme. There's more column space, and it's obvious to the user which record is selected. So the anatomy is simply that, first of all, the responsiveness, this particular form is using a snapshot of records. And we're turning off the record selectors on the form. And then on the current event, as we select different records, we're recording the value of the record ID into a temp var. Okay, current record ID. Temp vars, you can read more about them here. This is something, again, that I learned from attending one of Juan Soto's meetings. That you find that there. And a conditional formatting. So we've got these controls highlighted here. We've got a conditional formatting, and all it says is when the ID equals the temp var, then we're going to use this color scheme here. And you would find the color scheme by clicking the edit rule button. So there is a case for record selectors. If you don't have time to muck around with it, then it's quick. On live data, the record selector can indicate the status of a record. You can actually have both together. But yeah, I try and avoid them. I don't like them. So various ideas. You can put a lot of useful information on a form without overwhelming the user. So this particular form for the client requirements got a lot of columns there, but there are other sort of information that's available. So as we select a job, which is each row represents a client job, there are icons that are either hidden or grayed out or lit up according to the available data. What we don't want to do is have permanent icons and you click them and there's nothing to show. So in this particular job, the lawyers have not written any time yet. So the time right icon here is not lit up. However, there are some action items to follow up. So the action man icon is lit up. Again, using conditional formatting, each row that we select has we can see the team that's dedicated to this particular job, and that, yeah, there can be hundreds of jobs, and so many sort of combinations of team members, and they all have a role. So so we have a conditional formatting for the supervisor or the lead who runs the job, a record keeper who's responsible for keeping the emails and documents, and the red indicates a lawyer who's actually left the firm but was a member. And it's just by using the these values here. So if there are supervisor, yes, then you're going to get this color, and there's an order. If they're the order starts at the top. So if this condition is met, if the advisor is not active, it's going to be red. So that trumps the other ones below it. So supervisor, if they're a supervisor, yes, then we're going to get that, et cetera, et cetera. So they're just some properties that we set when we assign the team. Another one is sort icons. You can click to sort according to the columns. So we just indicate that with a it's just an up and down icon. And if we click the header or the icon, the form will resort itself. It's a cumulative sort, so you can select multiple columns, and the previous sort will become the second priority. Click on the client, etc. So move on from there. And we've got the alternative record selector using conditional highlighting. And we've got some, in terms of putting information on the form, as we make each filter, as we filter by these columns or the dates, it gives us a little summary of how many jobs we've selected, what are the total fees for the selection we've made, and the average fee. And the conditional formatting for the date. So what we want is an alert when we're approaching the due date. It would be amber, and if it's overdue, it's going to be red. It's all fake data, by the way. But yeah, so using conditional formatting to highlight completion dates and their status. And the other thing you might be aware of is you can use tri-state checkboxes. We might think of checkboxes as true and false, but they have a null value. So selecting the third state null is going to show all records. And then if we can either select it or unselect it, and it will filter according to whether these jobs are flagship jobs. So a flagship is just it's a matter that we would tell the world about in international legal directories. And you can read more about triple state checkbox there. And also another feature here is that the form resizes according to the screen, but leaves a space for the task bar. So combo boxes, you know, combo boxes are great, but you consider their space usage. And one's not better than the other. It depends on the use case. So here we have an expanded combo box where we can see what it's about. And here we have one that's closed, but when we click on it, the list is exposed. So we use that for most forms. But this could be good for the column headers because of its minimal space usage. So you can see at the top here that we're using those. So if I want to filter by the matter or the client, I can have my combo box sort of collapsed like that, and I can still see the header here. And yeah, and it takes up minimal space. So yeah, that's what it looked like there. So we'll move on. And animations. So this particular application has a flashboard. It's like a dashboard, which you can see being fired here. And what this is an artificial construct. You don't need to animate them, but what I'm trying to do is draw the user's attention to the issues that they should be looking at constantly. But I had a lot of trouble with that, and that seemed to be that navigation controls were the answer, because I was using tabs. You look across the top, we've got login, flashboard, timekeeper, etc. It was all done with tabs. The thing about tabs is that a lot of the code stays live, whereas when you use navigation control, it's only got one form open. So we're only looking at dividing up the code into subforms here down at the bottom. So when I was sort of searching this online, a lot of people were having trouble with animations blinking. They were kind of really blinking crazily. The navigation controls seem to fix that. And the yes, navigation control there avoids flashing as the labels animate. Navigation controls are better than tabs in my experience, because they close out forms and you only have one form open at a time. There's some references you can go and have a look at there about navigation controls. They're actually designed for when Microsoft Access was going to become a web application. Text boxes, just a newbie thing, but I see some applications and they've got the text right up against the left border, or they might have the accompanying label against the right border. So this is the way it should look. This is the way it shouldn't look. And it's pretty easy. You just, with your text boxes, you just put a small margin at the top, maybe at the left. If it doesn't, if it's not looking right, but it's kind of subconsciously, the user can see that it doesn't look professional if you don't have that space properly. So anchoring for form and size. So what happens is that this form will auto expand to the size of the screen, which is sort of code's too much to go into now. But as we do that, what's going to happen is that the right of the form is going to move out to the right edge of the screen. And of course, I want these sort of menu icons to shift out with them. So the way that you do that is you select those icons, go to anchoring, and what you're doing is top right of form is the option that you would choose there. So when the form resizes, they're going to stay where they are in relation to the right edge. Yeah, so anchoring ensures the icons stay. So in development, they'd be sitting here, but they're going to move out with the right edge of the form there. Another one is the sidebar. So the application we've been looking at takes up all the screen real estate when we're using it, but sometimes you want to interact with, say, Outlook. So what we have is a sidebar, which gives a lot of the functionality in a small bar that sits on the right of the screen. And what it does is interacts with Outlook. So it opens up Outlook, resizes it. When we open the sidebar, we choose a client job and close it, and Outlook's been resized to allow for the width of the sidebar. And then a lot of the functionality is shown in these menus here. So, and it does things like you can save these emails, you can reply and it will be saved to the document management system. You can turn emails into reminders and action items, but it's not a technical thing. It's more about thinking about how you can make your application easier for the client to use. So how we get that, if we look back on here, what happens is that the form is actually, you can see my cursor, is actually a blue background. And when we open up, that disappears and it completely disappears. It's not transparent. You can click through to the applications that are underneath. So this is the form in design mode, and it's set on this blue background. And I'm calling it a green screen effect. That's what the movie makers call it. I've chosen blue. The color that you choose here should not be similar to the colors that you've got in your other controls, or they're going to become semi-transparent as well. So you've got to choose a color that is opposite to what you have. So in terms of turning the back, what will happen is when you open up the form, it's going to say make the back of the form transparent, and these are the declarations that you need, and the code it's really these 2 lines of code down the bottom here that's going to make that blue disappear, so you can work as if it were not existing. Command buttons and hover effect. So let's just do this. No code required for this. It's just it's kind of nice as you hover above them. Yeah, it's obvious which ones you're hovering above. Adds a bit of pizzazz. So when you drop a standard command button, I don't think they look very nice. So the way we achieve the hover effect is there's a hover property. So here we have these hover colors that we can choose, and here we have the standard colors when we're not hovering. So we have 2 sets. You've got your hover colors and your standard colors. Scroll bars, I might just skip through that, but take scroll bars off if you don't need them. And so that's basically the end. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. If it fosters any thought about how you might come up with your applications. And we can go to any questions. So David mentioned he loves the cumulative sorting. Yeah, so we can go into the code of that. What if you want to have an offline session? We can have a chat about it. If you could do that.
I have to sort of wear 2 hats here. I want to continue, but I also, looking at the clock and thinking we should stop the recording and give people a chance to discuss and ask questions and provide follow-up if they want. So are there any other questions before we stop the recording? Comments?